In fact, I was given this name by my beloved husband over there when he first met me. He said, I know what you are. You are an ABCD. That was the first time I ever heard that phrase. So now imagine this blind ABCD has to make choices. You know, when you are an Indian American, you don't just grow up with two different languages. You don't just grow up with two different sets of norms and two different ideas about how you're supposed to practice religion, etc. You grow up with two different ways of thinking and two different ways in which you are supposed to live your life. You know, as an Indian, you're taught the importance of duties and responsibilities, particularly to your elders and to God. And you're taught that, you know, choices have consequences. And so you have to think about those consequences because in the end, choices have limitations. Well, as an American, you're taught that, well, choice is, well, it's necessary, it's wonderful, it's about possibilities. So when you're growing up in this country, you know, you go to school and you say, well, yeah, my parents, they met each other for the first time on their wedding night. What? Your parents met each other for the first time on their wedding night? Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, that sounds horrific, you're told. If that were to happen to me, I would die. Of course, as an Indian American kid, you're like, they don't look like they're on the verge of death, but, you know, what do I know? And when you're growing up in school, you say, well, yeah, I can't cut my hair. What? Somebody else can decide what you're going to do with your body? That's just not right. So what is right and wrong? And as an American, you're taught that it's your job to choose. It's your job to figure out who you are and what you want and what your preferences are. And so you're given two very different ideas about how you're supposed to live your life. You know, I've often thought that if you were born in India and just purely Indian, or if you're just American, your life is a hell of a lot easier. And the reason is because you know what script you're supposed to follow. And you come to this other culture and you say, oh yeah, the way they do things in that other country is really interesting and we should learn from them. But really what they're saying is that other country is really interesting and we'll take the things that we agree with, but all the stuff we disagree with, we know that's just weird. But what happens is those two scripts are actually both a part of you. How do you choose? How do you make those big decisions about career, marriage, and a whole host of things? So here I am, this confused Macy. Now add to that the fact that I'm also blind. Now if there's one thing that both Indians and Americans agree on is they have no idea what to do with you. That's where you have consensus. Like, what am I supposed to be when I grow up? I remember when I was in school, the teachers used to tell us that, you know, when you grow up, you can do and be whatever it is you want to be, as long as you put your mind and heart to it. And so when my teacher said, you know, asked us all, what are you going to be when you grow up? I remember I raised my hand and I said, I'm going to grow up to become a pilot. You can imagine the reaction of all the kids and the teacher. The teacher was so speechless, she was like, well, that's interesting, child. Well, it wasn't too long, it did dawn on me that perhaps I needed to do more than have put my mind and heart to becoming a pilot. I might actually have to put my eyes to it too. And so then that begged the question, what was I going to be when I grew up? I had to look around. It seemed like photographer was off the table, and then brain surgeon seemed a little difficult. So I started to look around. And there were lots of options, but none of them were quite appealing. So I remember when I went to Spain, wherever I would go, some random people would walk up to me and slap money in my hands and expect me to give them lottery tickets in return. Apparently blind people had cornered the lottery ticket market there for a while. And then when I went to Japan, and even Korea, I found that, you know, people would expect me to start performing these magical massages. You know, somehow there was something special in my hands that I hadn't yet discovered. And, you know, when I was growing up in high school here in New Jersey, my guidance counselor assumed he didn't have to show me the college manual because I, like other blind people, about 90% of them would end up on Social Security and SSI. But then there were those who thought, well, you know, look, she might be the next Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles, and so I was handed a clarinet. That didn't work out so well, though. So then people said, well, maybe she could go to college. In which case, what I was going to be when I grew up was obvious to everybody other than me. Just become a justice is blind. So, I ended up going to college. I ended up going to the University of Pennsylvania, not to become a lawyer though. I ended up going to the Wharton School of Business, and while I was there, I ended up both pursuing a business degree as well as a degree in the College of Arts and Sciences. And I remember becoming very interested in psychology, and I started to do some studies. And I'll tell you one of the studies that, to you guys you might understand why I did this. When I had this opportunity to do my senior thesis, I had to construct a study, and I decided, I'm going to study religion, and how religion is a really horrible, harmful thing for society. Okay? So here I am being the rebel. By the way, the first thing I did when I got to college was cut my hair. Terrible. So I did this study where I start surveying members of all different religions, fundamentalist religions like Muslims and Orthodox Jews and all kinds of religions like Catholics and Methodists and Baptists, all the way down to Reformed Jews and Unitarians. My mom banned me from studying the Sikhs. So I study all these religions, and I'm studying how their outlook affects their likelihood to become depressed. Because I'm thinking, my God, I have so many rules to live by. Of course this has got to lead to depression. Well, I was wrong. It turned out that, contrary to my beliefs, members of the fundamentalist faiths turned out to be more optimistic and less likely to become depressed. In fact, just believing in God turned out to have a positive influence in people's lives. One of the things that's also interesting about that study was that study was published in 1992, and it was the first documentation of the benefits of religion. And you probably all know nowadays there's lots of studies in religion. It was my one and only study. In those days, studying religion was a very, very, very not done thing. But I had this thing that I was going to study religion. Then I went off to graduate school. And I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Well, maybe I'll study culture. As an Indian American, culture sounds cool. I seem to know something about culture, even though I was wrong as an undergrad. Let me study culture. And this phenomenon known as Tiger Mom? Well, I did the first documentation of Tiger Mom, not that I knew that's what it was supposed to be called. Well, I was a PhD student at Stanford University. Who knows, maybe I was having dilemmas with my mother. So I did this very simple study. I took a bunch of 7-year-old kids, Asian American kids, Anglo American kids, and I either gave them a choice of activity, or I had their mothers make the choice for them. Americans did exactly the way we would have expected them to do. They performed better when they got to choose. They were in fact extremely angry if they were told that their mothers had made the choice. And there were American kids that were like, "You asked my mother?" Now, by contrast, the Asian children, they actually performed better for their moms. They were more motivated by the activities. They did even better for their moms than they did when they got to choose. And that was actually the first time that there was, for me it was an interesting study because it showed real cultural differences, but it was also the first time when a study was conducted which documented the possibility that all our notions of choice were a cultural construct. That in fact, while there was an innate desire to sort of be in control, none of us want to be thrown in jail, but that beyond that, choice was something that we were taught. That we are in fact taught what to think about choice. How many choices we should have, how a choice should be made, who should make the choice, what constitutes a meaningful choice. And that our cultures teach us this. That was the first time when people actually started to sort of wake up and think about the fact, well, you know what? Maybe when Americans think their views of choice are universal, maybe they're not so universal. Maybe we need to start thinking about the ways in which people's upbringing shapes their attitudes about choices. Well, you could say the rest is history. After that, I became very passionate about studying choices. One of the things that I've really enjoyed doing over the years is I've gone to many different countries. I didn't end up being a pilot, but I did end up traveling to many different parts of the world. world. And one of the things that I've always done in my research is really had a passion for asking people from all different walks of life about the kinds of choices that they make. You know, small consumer choices like the choice of soda pop, clothing choices, really important choices like dating choices, investment choices, healthcare choices, and looking at the ways in which we experience dilemmas that are common to all of us. So, for example, what are the challenges we all have when it comes down to choosing investments, what are good financial investments, but also looking at cultural differences. For example, the way we approach consumer choices, the way we approach big choices like religion, moral choices, political choices. So I really had a very good time studying choice in many different ways. And I tried to bring as much of that together in the book, The Art of Choosing. Today, I've actually entered a new phase of my career. And I guess what I'm studying now won't surprise you, tries to take what I've done in the past and build on that. And so today what I'm doing, as mentioned by the person who introduced me, I recently created and started to direct a new program at the Columbia Business School called the Global Leadership Program. And what that program is really trying to do is essentially two big things. One is to try to change the way we currently think of the science of leadership. Currently, the science of leadership is very Western-based science. It mainly comes from Western ideas. And essentially what the goal of this Global Leadership Program is to do is to make that science both more interdisciplinary as well as more global in where it draws its ideas from. And so it tries to study people from all different walks of life as well as the thinkers from all different parts of the world to create a more comprehensive understanding of how can we think of leadership, particularly when we think of the challenges of the modern world. The second thing that this Global Leadership Program is trying to do is we are creating more and more innovative education platforms, not just for the purpose of our students, but also for the purpose of trying to create a greater entrepreneurial mindset amongst people around the globe. So we're actually offering free educational, we have a free online educational platform that's available to people across the globe for the purpose of really developing more entrepreneurial mindset, better leadership skills amongst people across the globe to really try to help empower people so that they can deal with their sort of local problems, whether they be in not-for-profit or for-profit arenas. And so that's a sort of quick summary, and obviously all of these things I'm giving you is a very quick summary, but I'm happy to talk about all of this in much greater detail. So, how do you think of this blind Indian American girl? You might say that this girl was born with a lot of baggage, and this baggage that she was handed was rather challenging and made her life quite difficult. That is certainly one way to think about the narrative. But I want to offer you an alternative narrative for thinking about that baggage. And that is to think about the baggage as really gifts that were offered to her. And that you might say that in a sense by being given those gifts, she was blessed. Because in a sense you could say that what I ended up becoming was influenced by all of those pieces that made me. As an Indian, what I learned was that you don't ask the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Instead, what you ask is, where is my value added? What could I be good at? Because after all, choice has its limitations, it has its consequences. And so you have to think about, you have to put constraints on what you want and think about where is your value added the greatest? What are the things on which you can choose with integrity and discipline? As an American, what I learned was that you didn't have to settle for the major options put before you. That you could create new possibilities. And that you should think beyond those major options and try to create possibilities. As a blind person, what I realized was that I wouldn't have the kinds of choices that the sight didn't have, but that in a way that would make life easier. Because anytime I made a choice, I would have to push past doorkeepers and naysayers. That meant that I could never afford to choose on a whim. And that realization reminds me every day we talk like this, people say, well, Sheena, boil it all down for me. What exactly is the art of choosing? And here you wrote this whole book. Can you boil this down into one line? And clearly that's a tall order. But I'm going to offer you a line which I think that people here in this room are uniquely qualified to really understand what I mean. So what I learned as an Indian, as an American, as a blind person, is that it is only when we are able to balance our hopes, our dreams, and an appreciation for the possibilities with a clear-eyed assessment of the limitations that we are able to master the art of choosing. Thank you very much.